I mentioned at the beginning of the show during my segment about here's a list of 10 horrible things that Donald Trump has made clear he's going to do during his upcoming first term. I mentioned that Trump's incoming education secretary is involved with a group that actually wrote a blog post saying, child labor really isn't bad. It's something we should really look at. I'm talking about the Acton Institute, and this is the think tank that's funded by Trump's Secretary of Education pick, Betsy DeVos. And the Acton Institute recently advocated for putting kids back into the workforce. They put an essay up on their blog earlier this month, and it said that child labor is, quote, a gift our kids can handle, going on to say, quote, let us not just teach our children to play hard and study well, shuffling them through a long line of hobbies and electives and educational activities. A long day's work and a load of sweat have plenty to teach as well. Now, child labor is not 100% forbidden in the U.S. You can have actors, right? There's certain rules, and they have to have a chaperone and be taking classes on set, et cetera, et cetera. Newspaper delivery is something where there's an exemption for kids that is made, but it's pretty tightly regulated. Like, for example, the Supreme Court decision that upheld flag burning as a constitutional right, which hasn't stopped Trump from demanding stripping of citizenship and a year in prison if you burn a flag. So not exactly a big concern for the Trump administration, incoming administration. Of course, education activists and advocates are looking at DeVos's history, and they're very concerned. The child labor thing is obviously a concern, and it makes good headlines, but she has a strong history of supporting school voucher programs, which we know are hugely destructive to public schools. We also know that she is not big on public schools, more broadly speaking. So the child labor headline makes a really good headline, Pat. But you have someone here who is going to be the education secretary who wants to take a ton of money away from public schools. That's what we call red alert emergency in the political world.
And I love how she's talking about child labor in this sort of romanticized way of the sweat coming down their faces, and that it builds so much character, neglecting the fact that this is just really going to help companies on the other end. That's the real motivation there.
It's interesting that you will have an administration which has, on the one hand, people advocating. I mean, Trump took like 10 different positions on the minimum wage, or six positions on the minimum wage. But you'll have a lot of Trumpists in his administration who want a lower or no minimum wage. And meanwhile, you will have an education secretary involved with a group that romanticized the idea of putting kids to work. Now, as far as the defunding of public schools, poor kids will have no way to get to the private schools you want to add and partially fund with public school money. When you take a billionaire family that was born on third base and thinks they hit a triple, as Chuck Collins told us in a recent interview we did, how can anything good come from that for the average American, for the average kid, when you put the lifelong kleptocrat, plutocrat oligarchs in power of selecting people that will run education? Trump's selections are going to piece by piece dismantle much of what we consider to be the foundational direction of the U.S. in 2016. Education accessible for more people, taking climate change seriously, understanding that huge income and wealth inequality is bad for the economy, and it's really bad for everybody. You could argue even for the very rich, although they may not see it that way. Jeff Sessions, anti-marijuana, the child labor education stuff, EPA climate change going completely backwards. Trump is going to dismantle, if we allow it, Pat, so much of the progress that has been made in the last 8 years.
And we see from his cabinet picks that loyalty is to the utmost importance to him.